But I wanted to formally, for the purposes of this gathering, once again re-emphasize the government's appreciation of the immense hard work that many district advisory councillors put in their areas, and the type of pressure. I do understand the pressure that they do get under, in particular when there is a community issue or there is some natural disaster, or indeed, as we have seen in the past 18 months, a pandemic. I think there's also the fact that many people, perhaps in the urban areas, don't have an appreciation that district advisory councillors are not restricted, for example, to just one specific area. Many of the areas that the district advisory councillors do look after are spread over a wide area. And there are many issues that do pertain to that. We have seen, for example, the areas here in Tailevu, in Nosori area, where the urban sprawl is actually expanding. And so a lot of the people who are now, perhaps did not live in places like this, are now living here. They work in Suva and they travel from Nosori. One of the issues, of course, that does pertain as a result of this urban sprawl is that it does put pressure on infrastructure. I was just talking to Seru Sorenberg, who's with the Water Authority of Fiji. One of the reasons I know issues around here is water. And the reason why we have water issues now is because some of you who would have lived here for quite a period of time, you did not face those water issues some years back. But there's enormous pressure now on the water resources because of the huge movement of people. The Viria project that's going to be completed, God willing, by the end of next year, will add an additional 40 million liters of water to this area. At the moment, there's the shutting off of the valves in the evening time, and then the opening of the valves. If those things actually aren't or don't take place, you will in fact face water problems at the peak periods. So I would urge you and ask you to please bear with us. This water project is in excess of over $250 million. The wider project, in fact, is much larger from that perspective. We have the ADB funding, the Fijian government funding, European Investment Bank funding, and a number of other agencies that have actually contributed to the funding of this. So currently the system produces about 26 million liters of water. So with the project being completed by the end of next year, you'll have an additional 40 million. So you'll have about 66 million liters of water available, which could mean that you would then have water 24/7. Of course, the road issues, of course, have also emanated. There are a lot more people now traveling from Nosori to Suva. As you know, we've now got a 4-lane road all the way from Nosori to Suva. You've got this upgrade that we did around the airport. What actually that means, it means that also the property prices in this area will go up. And I'm sure those of you who live here would know that. The property prices will go up. There'll be a demand for more land, for people wanting to build their own homes. So there's a number of, what we call the sort of urbanization of semi-rural areas are taking place now. So even roads previously that did not get used as much, I know some of the non-FRA roads that some of the advisory councillors are talking about. Previously there probably only be 1 or 2 cars going on it in a day, if that at all. They're predominantly for people walking, for pedestrian walking. Now there are cars running up and down in those roads. So obviously there is a pressure on the infrastructure. So what I'm saying is that there needs to be a lot of changes that do need to take place. So a lot of these roads, that what you call the service roads or the side roads, they are non-FRA roads. They're privately owned roads actually. So all those issues need to be sorted out. In Fiji today there are more cars than ever before. As you know, when the duty was reduced a few years ago, nearly every person started buying a car. Parents like to say, oh, my son has now got a new car, or my daughter has got a new car. So that means there's a lot of build-up of vehicles. So roads that weren't used for cars before are now being used for roads. So we have to be able to understand that, and I know as district advisory councillors, some of you would face pressure from residents living in those areas saying, why isn't the road being built? And we have to, of course, you have to be able to, explain those things. Because as I said to some of the advisory councillors last week in Manodha, that if we start fixing up all the non-FRA roads, there are thousands and tens of thousands of kilometers of non-FRA roads. So which one do you give priority to? We have to give priority obviously to the public roads that have been assigned public roads. And how do we deal with those roads that are non-FRA roads? We need to come up with a plan regarding that. It's not something that will be solved overnight. But I wanted to use this occasion to just highlight to you and to those people who may not be advisory councillors, who may be actually using the service of advisory councillors, it is an extremely difficult task. They do have a challenge on their hands, and I think we need to obviously appreciate that. And so I'm glad that the organizers have actually organized this, appreciation day for district advisory councillors. We have over the number of years increased their allowances, and many would argue that perhaps it needs to be increased even more. But then the moment you increase it to a significant amount, then people will want to actually come forward and apply for those jobs. So that again adds another dimension to how you appoint district advisory councillors. So these are sort of what I call the growing pains of a modernizing nation state. Some of the practices that advisory councillors had previously cannot necessarily be applied now. Some of the ways of thinking that we used to have before cannot be applied now because your environment, your locality, your region, the demographics of the people that live in the area have changed. Obviously if you go back 20, 25, 30 years ago, many of these areas were predominantly agricultural lands. Now people who live here are people who simply don't grow agriculture, not into agriculture, but they live here. But they travel and work in Suva or various other parts. So your demographics have changed too. What their needs and demands are very, very different. So ladies and gentlemen, I want to acknowledge the work. There's obviously some issues perhaps that from our side we perhaps can better coordinate amongst the ministries, and that work is continuing. One thing that I wanted to also highlight to you is that we have been in the past 18 months or so looking at how we can improve government services to members of the public. It's an ongoing process. If you read our constitution, it says that where civil servants must serve the members of the public with integrity, with professionalism, with etiquette, basically with good manners, etc., and be responsive. What we are going to roll out, you'll see, and we've been working, we've got some training programs roll out, very basic things like calling members of the public sir or madam or Mr. Prasad or Mrs. Asenada Wati, whatever the name is. Those things make a difference. In the same way, I'm sure, if you call somebody or if you send an email or a text message to the Water Authority Fiji or FRA, or you go and see a doctor, if the doctor calls you, well, sir, I'm giving you this Panadol, or I'm giving you these antibiotics because of XYZ, please take it 3 times a day. If something wrong happens, come back to us. That's all the doctor has to say. If you go to the commissioner's office and the person on the other side of the counter says, thank you, sir, for coming this morning, how can I help you? They'll completely change the dynamics. That's one of the things we have been working on. We're looking at rolling that out. Or municipal councils. How do you talk to your ratepayers? I saw one particular issue on an email complaint, and the lady addressed that person by his first name. And I said to her, how do you know he's not a grandfather or a grandmother? She's not a grandmother. They probably are respected in the community, and here you are not even knowing them and calling them by their first name. At the very least, you could say sir or madam. These things make a difference. So I think these are some of the finer things that we are looking at rolling out. And all of us need to adapt these practices and adopt these practices. And I hope that we can work together, obviously. There are issues. They need to be resolved. I think we need to take a very positive approach to these things. We need to be solution-driven as opposed to simply identifying problems and not having a solution. Of course, many politicians love doing that. Maybe some of them are watching now. They love to just simply highlight issues without giving alternatives or solutions. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you once again for coming this morning. I'd like to thank, of course, all the different government agencies that have worked with the different advisory councillors. We'd like to thank you for your work. I'd also like to thank the families of the district advisory councillors. Most of the district advisory councillors are males. There are a few female district advisory councillors. I'd like to thank their husbands and their wives, respective husbands and wives, for the time that they, sacrifice away from the family, and they also their children. I think these things don't get recognized. I'd like to thank the families for this. And, as I said, together we can be able to improve services. And thank you once again for your services. Vinaka, thank you.